it's the Jazz, Utes, Cougars, or Aggies, these guys have got you covered.
Time to eat, fellas.
You're locked on to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
1, 2, 3, move it.
On 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. I hope Christian does know by now how sarcastic I am, because do you ever think, like, when you say something sarcastic, if I ever went to court and Christian was like, well, he said this to me, like, I'd be in real trouble.
I worry about everything
Christian
has heard us say if he wanted to take us to court.
I mean, just dry reading a sarcastic comment that wasn't meant that way, but just, like, taking it out of context, it'd be like, oh, man, I'd be in real trouble.
Provocation.
I want to remind you to join Hans and Scotty coming up next Tuesday at RGS Exteriors from noon to 3, 4235 Farm Road in West Jordan. It's time to talk some Utes and get to Bartle. Hit it, Christian.
Covering the Utes better than anyone else. This is Ute Insider Steve Bartle of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Hey, Steve, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, fellas. How we doing?
We're doing terrific. Hey, I can't remember the last time Utah won important back-to-back basketball games. And, you know, I get that they were actually pretty competitive to start the year last year and faded down the stretch. But to that point, it's honestly probably been close to a year since Utah basketball was winning back-to-back good games. And I guess you can say you've done that, or they've done that, against Oklahoma State and TCU. So do you sense real momentum heading into this BYU game tomorrow?
Yeah, it has been a minute since Utah's won some really valuable games, and the non-conference slate. They had those opportunities, but weren't able to get it done against three quality opponents. So to get this done now in back-to-back games, I think is really good for the program, and I do think they've found some momentum. They've found something that they can hold firm to and build upon. And this is their new standard of play. Craig has talked about this over the last 10 days or so, that, they had to learn what Big 12 play was actually about, right? You can watch it on film, you can talk about it, you can break it down on the whiteboard, you can talk about how physical it's going to be and all of this and all of that. But until you actually get on the court, you don't actually know what it's like. And so I think that's been something that Craig has harped on, that they had to actually experience it. And, they got a full welcome in that regard with Baylor, Texas Tech, and Iowa State, three of the top contenders, in the Big 12. They got a pretty strong introduction to Big 12 play. And I do think they learned from those three outings. And they played better against Iowa State. The result doesn't say that, right? The margin of victory for Iowa State doesn't suggest that. But I do think that's where it started to turn for Utah, was in that game. And they parlayed that into, a good production, good showing against Oklahoma State, where they, played with that physical, tough defensive mindset. But they also played a disciplined brand of offense, which I think, took advantage of Oklahoma State's defensive mentality, where they want to be super aggressive, get into passing lanes, take away shooters. And so, they're learning, they're growing, and they're showing progress over the last two games. To go on the road to Dallas-Fort Worth and get a win over the TCU Horned Frogs, who, coming into that game had won 9 straight at home. They were undefeated on the season. To get that win, to go wire to wire with the lead, with, standing a couple of TCU runs, especially late, where they kind of grabbed the momentum with about 5 minutes left. Utah responded time and time again, and I think that speaks to the mental side of things and the mental progress in terms of, the discipline, the mental toughness you need to have in this league. Because in those first 3 games, man, it was an absolute grind. I think it was Bill Riley that said they're like a boa constrictor, where they just get a hold of you and just suffocate you because they force you to play so good on every single play. And that demands a lot of guys mentally. And I think they really showcased good progress in that regard against TCU. now returning home with an opportunity tomorrow against BYU. We know what that game is. We know what that atmosphere is like. We know, what sort of mental toughness you need to win that game. And I think Utah, they do have momentum, but you can't rely on momentum itself. You got to continue to do the things that you've been doing over the last week or so and up it even further against BYU tomorrow.
What kind of game does it have to be for Utah to have its best chance against BYU?
Yeah, I think Utah, they've shown that they can win. They can in a couple different ways, right? They can score, they can get hot, they can shoot. They haven't been able to shoot. They haven't shot it well over the last couple of weeks, and that's been the big issue. They've really come along on the defense side of the ball, and I think as long as they, play good, sound defense, they can get enough offense. They've really found more balance offensively. Against TCU, they had 4 in double figures and then 2 others with 8 points apiece. And then I think another was 6. So they're getting good scoring balance where they can, get it inside. They can shoot from outside. But I think in every Big 12 game, it's just going to be a grind. Each and every Big 12 game is going to be a grind where you have to play hard on each end of the floor. You have to play disciplined. And I think, if you look at both of these teams, they find success in similar ways. You look at their shot distribution. They love the corner three. They love the three from the top, and they love getting in the paint. They're not teams that like to get into the mid-range a lot. And I think that's going to be really unique in essentially you're defending yourself in a lot of ways in terms of the offensive attack that each program likes to have. Obviously, BYU, they've got talent on that team with Denham and all of that. But Utah's got a good core, a good, they're finding a good 7, 8, 9-man rotation that they feel really good about and can match up with Utah or with BYU tomorrow. I'm fascinated with, a potential matchup of Igor Denham and against Keanu Dawes, just given the size and the way that both players are playing right now. I think that could be a really intriguing matchup. But I think, it's going to be a grind. You're going to have to play strong defense, and you're going to have to grind it out on the offensive end to get some points.
Steve, pretty wide-ranging conversation with Witt and the new coordinator earlier this week, Jason Beck. What did you learn from that? Maybe what stood out to you?
Yeah, I thought that was really good to hear from the coaches. We didn't get an opportunity to talk to Coach Whittingham, during the early signing period, which we typically do, but just given kind of everything that was going on with the program, that month with how busy they were recruiting in the transfer portal and finishing up signing day, all of that, we didn't get to hear from Witt until now. And Utah also provided, Jason Beck, obviously the introductory presser and Morgan Scally as well. And I thought it was fascinating. There's certainly a few things that we took away from that. Obviously Cam Rising, we'll start there. Whittingham let it be known that, he's no longer on the roster, but he's going to allow Cam Rising to announce on his own time what his plans are. And, we talked about it last week, Ben, and I did not expect Cam to be a part of the roster next year. So we'll see what Cam elects to do. Like I mentioned last week, he may elect to go through the draft process. To take on that next phase of his football career. He may elect to enter the transfer portal, which had been previously reported that he intended to do. That's certainly an option. Then he may also elect to move on to the next phase of his life, which could involve him getting into coaching and taking an opportunity to start coaching football. And I think all three of those options are certainly viable for him. And the next couple biggest things, I think, he touched on Dorian Singer. There's an opportunity for him to return in 2025. It's something that Dorian absolutely wants because it's an opportunity to play with Devin Dampier, who those two are brothers and have grown up playing football together. And so there's a unique opportunity for Dorian to potentially play with Dampier in that relationship. He's got a waiver submitted to the NCAA to potentially get a season of eligibility back from his freshman year at Arizona. There's also the NCAA, which we've talked about, previously. They're considering, moving to 5 seasons of eligibility instead of 4 seasons with the redshirt year. That would also impact Dorian. And then beyond that, Coach Whittingham talked about the loss of 2 defensive starters to the transfer portal, in Cameron Calhoun and Keanu Tanavasa. We've talked about both, but I thought it was really interesting that he let it. He said it as plainly as he could. That NIL was a significant factor for both Calhoun and Tanavasa, which I think we all kind of knew and understood. Keanu has shared his personal reasons as to why he elected to go to BYU, but I think we've learned, this past month that, the defensive line market in the transfer portal is a premium, and I think there was probably a nice chunk of change for Keanu going to BYU that he was certainly praying about. So there's that, and then just the first opportunity to interact with Jason Beck. It was interesting. I thought that he was much more open and willing to have conversations and willing to go in depth on some of his thoughts and feelings and just his beliefs more so than Andy Ludwig. Andy Ludwig was pretty cut and dry with his commentary. He's been in the game for so long. He didn't say much. And I thought it was really refreshing just to hear from Jason Beck, kind of elaborate on some things and to explain, his offense, the process in terms of, him coming into the program and having to hit the ground running in the transfer portal, right? Like he had his hands, in their transfer portal recruiting, kind of remaking this offense and bringing in who they brought in. And so, there's a lot still, we've touched on a number of those topics at KSL Sports. I've written about a number of those topics and still have plenty more to dive into from that press conference on Tuesday.
Why do you think Coach Witt, going back to his comments about NIL and saying that was the major factor in those 2 players transferring, what purpose did that serve for him to be so forthcoming about that? I was surprised he made it a priority to get that message out there.
Well, it's just a matter of fact, right? Getting the truth out there that it was a significant factor in both of them, in both of their recruitments, that was the issue. And I think there's always a reason for it. And I think for Utah specifically, you want that out there, but also it can serve as sort of a motivating factor to generate, potentially more funds in terms of NIL. When you have a guy like Tanavasa and Calhoun to potentially motivate boosters to provide more resources, right? I think he talked about it even earlier in that press conference that, you're always wanting for more in terms of NIL resources. He did something similar, a couple years ago. I think it was the 2022 season. USC was coming to Salt Lake City with Caleb Williams. Utah had just lost a commitment. I think he flipped to TCU. And Witt, during that week, a lot of the talk was about NIL around USC's program and what they were getting and with Caleb Williams and all that. And Witt took the opportunity to kind of talk about where Utah was at with their NIL resources. And lo and behold, about a month later, they finished that recruiting cycle, with Spencer Fano, Caleb Lomu, Smith Snowden, Hunter Clegg committed at that time. And to land those guys, you got to have resources. You got to be able to provide NIL and all that to those types of prospects. And I think, that moment in and of itself kind of helped Utah close on the recruiting trail. So, I don't think it was necessarily shot. I don't at either of those 2 players. I've heard numbers in terms of what they've gotten. I can't report it, but I've heard numbers, and these guys certainly are making, not just those 2 individually, but players across the board now are making pretty significant amounts of money now.
Steve, thank you for your fine work. As always, we look forward to our conversations with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, fellas. Have a good one.
You too, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve Bartle covers the Utes for KSLSports.com.